Yeah, please welcome Indivisible. So I'm really excited for us to talk about or have the folks from different parts of Indivisible here in New York and even national to talk about their organization and really discuss how organizing in 2017 is and how it is now for us to really amplify the voices of the grassroots and how can we really engage in this new era we are at. So maybe we could start by just a quick introduction, what you're doing, who you are, and why you're doing it, and who you're doing it for, and what's the latest action you've taken so far. So maybe let's do Josh, who's the senior data advisor for the Indivisible National.
Yeah, so my name is Josh Nussbaum. I joined the national team at Indivisible about a month and a half ago, and the scope of work that I'm taking on with the national group is really looking at the data and technology that the national group is using right now, and then going through a process with the leadership team of thinking through where the organization wants to go long term, and then identifying and prioritizing, the gaps in the infrastructure that they currently have to try to, build, solid infrastructure in the long term. And the organization is going through, a process to, figure that out. We just went through a listening process with as many groups as possible around of the 6,000 groups that are around the country. Asking them, going through like long form interviews to really identify what groups need, and we'll be rolling that back out to groups to get feedback on what we're taking from it. And also put out a survey that folks could also participate in. And for me, it's been mainly the sort of getting my arms wrapped around what all has been set up. And a lot of decisions were made very rapidly as the organization was scaling very rapidly. And the nice thing about my position is that I'm not getting pulled into the rapid responses right now. I get to only think about the long term, and we're going through like an intentional process to try to build these systems that in the long term to for what's going to make sense for where the organization wants to go, not what the immediate fires are week by week. I can run through what the systems are and what the gaps are that I'm seeing, or I can wait if that's enough of a preamble.
There's a portion for that. So.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole, again with New York Indivisible. Apparently, I'm the only one who prepared a PowerPoint. I'll go quickly through it. New York Indivisible needs additional help on the technology side, and that's how Rapi and I connected. And so I've set up a bit.ly. If anyone would like to give their contact information and tell a little bit about yourself, please go there and sign up. If you're interested in getting involved with the organization just in terms of political activism, you can do that on our website. But this is set up specifically so we can get technologists. And that's the quick form that it'll lead to. So what does Indivisible do? We write letters to our elected representatives. And I'm going to point out kind of a little bit of the detail of what we do because there's technology that could help us do it a lot better. And part of that is you can see on the left, your right, as we bring these letters that have been nicely crafted and well researched out to the public, we get signatures, and then we bring them to our elected representatives. But we also collect names for sign up to our organization. We also organize phone calls to our elected representatives, which means that lately we've been coordinating with groups like Indivisible Brooklyn and Indivisible Nation BK to broaden our reach, and we've been using things as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, which is a little bit hairy because, as you can see, I've had to block out the people's personal names. Somebody could get in there and change everything. But what we do is we watch, people sign up for name slots, and they watch the notes come in as each person makes the call, and it's kind of a group motivation technique. And then we also meet with our elected representatives. This is a coalition of New York, of New York groups that got to meet with Senator Schumer. All that hard work of calling and letter writing gets recognition, and they see us as representing, kind of being the node between the electorate and the elected. We also organize town halls, and we attend town halls. This is one that we organized. It takes a lot of work. There's basic event management technology that we could benefit from in those terms. Things like organizing ushers, or just keeping track of what's been done and what hasn't. And then we attend rallies. At rallies, there's a lot of opportunity to gather stories. For some people have been floating, a lot of people have been floating ideas about a story bank, so that when we have a specific issue come up, we can index which story is the most poignant to be told, contact that person, and get them in front of the media. But we don't have that right now. And we also build our progressive community. We have a book reading club, picnic in the park. We do monthly speaker series. That's a health talk that was given. And then we also, some of us went down to Georgia to help canvass for the John Ossoff campaign. So a lot of organizing, a lot of people organizing, and that it's kind of surprising how much detail that requires of our organizers. So we have all these things that are proving successful, and we're wondering, our group and groups across the state and the nation are wondering, how do we expand? How do we make this bigger and increase the numbers? We're also asking, how do we get that engagement with the volunteers? How do we get that engagement with the people in the park who are signing our letters? How do we get that, turn that into someone who's very engaged and is going to go vote? How do we get a retweet and turn that into a phone call, and bring people directly in? Because right now, a lot of times somebody will sign up and then they'll get our newsletter about a meeting. Maybe they'll go, maybe they won't. And that's, it's a bit of it's like clicks. They've got 7 or 8 clicks before they've actually had an impact. How do we make it so that their first click has an impact on our advocacy efforts? And this is, these dots are drawn from the Indivisible Guides website as to all the groups that show up when you search Indivisible Guide for New York. And it's quite a few. So what we're also asking is, how do we coordinate? How do all of us in the same area, with the same objectives and pretty much the same method, give or take, how do we network and make our work count for even more? So those are the 3 problems. How do we increase quantity, quality, and network? The solution, we've been looking at this problem for a while now, and one of the solutions that has become really prominent is installing a volunteer management platform. We can do this in order to create something like a statewide calendar where it's searchable. You can find what events are going on in your area, or on a certain date. If 2 people from her group and 2 people from my group and 2 people from Josh's group all are really, really passionate about the spotted green frog, but there's only 2 in each group to get passionate about it, they can perhaps meet up and create a force online together and have some impact in New York State, which is our scope. We'd love to coordinate nationally, but the state is ambitious as it is. Structured onboarding, signing up for a newsletter is not quite enough. We've discovered we really need to bring them in and kind of orient people and get them to understand what the organization is about. Aggregating data for our information, what's having an impact, what isn't. When we need to go to donors, how do we provide them with numbers to prove that what we're doing is making a difference? And then, maybe a small group in Poughkeepsie is up to something really clever and needs some funding, and maybe us in Manhattan could provide them with a little extra to get that project done. Perhaps we could do some peer-to-peer fundraising on it. And last, gamifying participation. Keep the virtual gold star for people showing up and making a call. Some of the design challenges of doing something like a volunteer management platform are data security. You know, on that Google sheet alone, there's plenty of issues with or vulnerabilities. And also, once we create something like a platform that a lot of people are storing data, it's that much more important. How do we enable people, each group, to have a sense of autonomy so that they're not they don't feel like they're being melded into just one thing, and that these groups that have formed their identities and have really become something in and of themselves and are local, and that's the power of their being local is their power. How do we make sure we don't undo that by making this a state network? And how do we get buy-in? How do we achieve critical mass so that it is, the more people that are on it, the more useful it is. And integration, you were saying you integrate you post on like 120 something odd Facebook pages. Is there a way we can cut that? Can we fix that? Can we possibly post on a volunteer management platform, or have some sort of a platform where people just put up their event and then it kind of goes out to all the various other social media? And also, how do we make sure that we are not creating more noise? Just throwing a whole lot of people into a room and everybody's talking really loudly. We've had issues with that. Just trying to make sure that the message is poignant so that, we stand out, and people like Senator Gillibrand know to kind of look out for what to look out for, and give us retweets. And that's it. Please do sign up. Give us your contact information. We'll be sending out information shortly as to how to get involved. Thanks.
I most certainly do not have a PowerPoint. But yes, I'm Josh again from Indivisible Harlem. In all of our groups, it's all the same. I think you're going to hear a lot of the same sorts of things, but just a little bit us. We started in December, just 9 scared people in a restaurant in Harlem, just totally, everything was happening at sort of breakneck speed, which has kind of been the speed that has been maintained by this administration and has subsequently been maintained by our activism. And I think that, and you mentioned this in what you were saying, that Indivisible sort of has moved at a very rapid pace. And I think that what Indivisible is so good at is mobilizing and getting people to do a call relay and, to step up. But it's, I think we're learning, at least we are learning how to organize. And I did a move on resistance summer training. We talked all about this, how the difference between the two, and that organizing is really for the long term and creating like coordinated routes between groups and communities, and mobilizing is like, hey, I need you to go vote. Hey, I need you to go do this thing. And I think that that's sort of a good paradigm for like any of the tech issues too we've been having that we've run into. Just a little bit about how we organize. We communicate using Slack. But then we also have a Google Calendar, and then there's an email list, and like there are many moving pieces because it seems that not one has everything you need, right? And so that's sort of how most of the communication as far as action goes is organized through Slack. We break into committees. For example, I'm on the communications team and on the LGBTQIA committee, so sort of do those sorts of things. What else did I talk about? Yeah, obviously Indivisible is in response nationally to the Trump agenda, but there are just myriad problems in New York State, and the whole IDC situation prevents us from having an actual Democratic state Senate. And that has been a big roadblock for us in ever feeling that we can enact change nationally, because in our own backyard, things are totally messed up. We are in our partisan voter index is like D plus 41 or something insane. So at first it was like, oh, what are we going to do? But it's happening here too. Yeah, that's kind of us. I mean, is there another point that I should like make in my introduction? Because we're going to talk about tech stuff later, right? Okay, love that. Great. Then that's me. Great. Awesome.
Hi, I'm Ginger. I'm with Indivisible Brooklyn. So we're structured. We sort of decided to take on an organizational structure that's a little bit different. We decided to look at ourselves and form in the city, state, and federal level. And the purpose of that is so that we could really focus on issues based on that. I would echo everything my fellow colleague, activist in Indivisible, had said with regard to the actions we take and some of the observations. The one thing I think that I would add to this is that at the city level, we've been doing a lot of work around immigration and deportation. And so I think that was one of the differences in the work that we do, and we also did some fundraising. I think one of the gaps that hasn't been mentioned that I'll just briefly state is around leadership. So I think that the gap that we're facing right now is that people come and go, or they hit burnout, and we're trying to figure out how to mitigate that. And so I was questioning whether this is actually the space for that, but maybe if it's a life hack, we can think through that. Yeah, so we work in close contact with our other Indivisible partners here in New York City. And I think that I'll keep it really short and sweet and leave it there. I'm happy to answer any questions later, too.
So I'm with Indivisible Nation BK, and to build on what everybody else has talked about, I think one of the things that we do in my group daily is post daily call scripts on Facebook, and it's a lot of work and it's that balance between proactive and reactive. You know, we think we're ahead of the game, and then something crazy happens, and then we suddenly have to generate content. And we do share with about 125 different groups nationally. I think the thing that I am personally obsessed with is the nature of engagement, and how do we both facilitate that first spark of engagement, and then how do we keep people engaged for over months and years, and hopefully shorter than that, because hopefully all of this will be magically solved by Robert Mueller, or maybe not. But how do you pick up the phone? Has anybody here made a phone call to their member of Congress? Okay, and not all of you have. That's cool. Maybe tomorrow you will. How many people here know who their congressperson is? If you don't, you need to look that up. You have to know who's representing you. And what's more important is that you, all of you, both as human beings and technologists and citizens, you can contact your elected officials and tell them what you want. That's what Indivisible is all about. So you can pick up the phone and you can call, and you're going to talk to some staffer. You're not going to actually talk to your member of Congress. Maybe you will. You won't. And you can tell them what you want. That's what you can do. It takes like 2 minutes. You can call every single day. You don't have to call every single day. You can sign letters. You can do this on a regular basis. And that's what Indivisible is all about, is generating that empowerment to know that you can do that. So one of the things that we do is we have this coalition of about 20 different New York City Indivisible groups. And we got to meet with Senator Schumer on Friday, himself, for 90 minutes. I'm just a person. Like, I'm not a professional organizer. I'm an occupational therapist. I didn't do anything before November 6th. I swear to you, I gave money. I have a Hillary hat. That was about it. You can do that too. And that's what Indivisible wants to do. And what you can help us do is using technology to let people know that that's possible for them. You don't have to be somebody powerful or rich in order to participate in your government. So we are obsessed with amplification. We're obsessed with social media outreach, and we're obsessed with coalition building. We also use Slack. The coalition uses Google Groups, which I hate. I already told Pete, yeah, he knows, in her group. It's not good enough. So we need better communication platforms. Indivisible National uses Mobilize, which is okay, but it mostly just results in another email you have to read. So a better communication platform and better ways of amplifying, please help us.
Thank you so much for that really awesome introduction. So there's a lot of things that you mentioned through your introductions that we should delve into. First of which is just how is this energy from November 8th onwards made you realize that you as a citizen, as you Lisa mentioned, like you can do things as simple as this, and you can affect change as simple as calling your senator or your representative for 2 minutes, right? Where did that come from, and how were you empowered? And just the general lay of the land of how everything is in terms of empowerment and engagement, and how are you going about it as leaders of your own Indivisible group, and how is National, empowering that as well through your different affiliates? Does anyone want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you saw in the healthcare fight is Indivisible at its very best, and it's about people getting off the sidelines and standing up. And what I think was really amazing about that and why it was so effective is it was always very personal and very emotional, and in people like that story bank idea is so good, and that should happen. Because it was people stepping up and realizing that this shit is like not a spectator sport, and that's kind of what Indivisible is all about. Is that you just have to, democracy like dies without you actually stepping up and doing the thing. And lately, actually, we talked at I don't know if this tracks. We had a meeting last night, and I grew up singing, and I grew up in choir as a very young kid. And there's a thing called stagger breathing, where like everyone's holding a really big note, and you it's just sort of a known thing. You don't talk about it, but like sometimes somebody needs to take a breath, and you hold the note for them, and then you take a breath, and blah 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 blah, and sort of pass the buck that way. And there's this like accountability that exists without really you discussing it, that kind of like is so important to our work, and I think can be certainly made better by some sort of accountability system for groups to like do actions and whatnot. But yeah, I think that we've kept the fight going because there are people do what they can, when they can, and how they can. And people, I'm crazy and I post every single day in my Slack, but there are people that just read it, and and then I'll see them a month later, and they'll be like, "Oh, I called so and so and so and so," and then I feel like I'm shouting into the void, but really it is falling in someone's ears, and someone's actually doing something. So, yeah.
I guess I would just say the something along the same lines is that I can say personally for me that I just started doing activism last year. I organized a union at my workplace, which is ironically a human rights foundation. And then when the election happened, I freaked out for 2 months and went to the Women's March and said, okay, people are not laying in bed or just drinking themselves through this. And so I got really excited, and then I thought, well, I have to do something after this, and I discovered Indivisible. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because I'm not unique. I feel like everybody that's part of Indivisible that I've spoken to, many of the people have been new activists. And so there's this ebb and flow of participation too, right? So like we all like think, oh, okay, things are going to be like psycho for a minute, and then something really crazy happens like DACA, and people get very angry, and then they get out into the streets. And it's when you capture those moments, that's when you really mobilize people. And that's when you say, listen, making that phone call, you think it's not going to do anything, and it does. Take a look at what happened with the ACA. It did not get repealed. There was no Trump care. And so for me, I had to really, I was a bit cynical about activism. I was like, oh, those tree huggers, they're not doing anything. But then I started doing activism. I said, oh, wait, yeah, actually that does work. I'm getting people on the phone, and I'm saying, this is what I care about. I'm getting these staffers on the phone. I said, this is what I care about. And I want to know that we're recording all of these calls, and that that it's good that you're recording them too. Just want you to know that we're paying attention. And that's what people are doing now. And I say the challenge is definitely participation, but I think it's figuring out how to capture that anger and that fear when it comes out. That's the opportunity we can look for. So.
My activism is entirely driven by anxiety, and that's not healthy, and that's not sustainable, because maybe at some point I won't be anxious anymore. What happens to my activism? What happens to our activism when we're not afraid and we're not outraged? DACA, I mean, the people took to the streets about that because it's so personal and it's so humane. And not all of the fights that we face coming up are that passionate. The next big fight's tax reform. Tax reform. Who is excited about that? Yes, be excited about that because that affects literally everybody, and every single fight is tied up in it, including DACA, including healthcare, including women's rights, and LGBTQ rights. It's all related to tax reform. But how do we get people to be excited about tax reform? So it's that balance between harnessing the energy of things that are really emotional and personal, and then converting that energy into the things that are less sexy, like voting in the primaries and tax reform.
So, right. One thing that was really apparent, or what Indivisible did so good at, was how you all defended the ACA, both here and throughout the nation. And I think was calling your senator one of the major tactics that you did, right? And one of the things that we all had a discussion with during our preliminary discussion was a call relay. And maybe it was very apparent throughout the discussion we had that every one of you were participating through that call relay. I think that Nicole mentioned a while ago. And maybe what's that about? Because I feel that through that presentation that Nicole showed us, we are seeing the limits of Google Sheets. And I think that's a really great space for technologists to provide support over, because that's something that has really activated a lot of your communities. And maybe anyone want to talk more about it, if possible?
Specifically about the call relay, I think it's something that people, an individual at home who hasn't gotten themselves involved in any other way, can still participate in. And it's important to make it as accessible as possible so that they can just instantly be able to lobby their elected official. I mean, there's an immediacy there that the computer screen allows that we can really harness. I keep on thinking of it in terms of getting the clicks down, and there's a lot of apps out there now that kind of facilitate making a call to your representative, but the group accountability part is missing from most of them. So it's combining the two and also making sure they have a clear place to go for that. It kind of feels like we're all sort of hunting and pecking for things in the web space. We all have our different databases and different things we're putting online, and wouldn't it be great if we had somewhere very central for people to just say, okay, this is the issue, this is a New York State issue, let's focus on it. Let everybody signing up for this relay, I know my name is safe when I put it in there, Troll's not going to get a hold of it, stuff like that. So I hope that's more specific.
I was going to add one quick thing. So I think call relays are great because of the accountability, and people like to feel like they're being counted in some way as a way to hold yourself accountable. Like, I know if I sign up for a call relay and everybody, did Lisa call? Did she? But I personally, I have kids and they have to do these reading logs, and I'm like, oh, Lord, nothing's going to take the joy out of reading more than having to write it down. So to take out that feeling, it's like another dichotomy between you want to be accountable, but you don't want to feel scolded or you don't want to feel obliged. And I think a way of doing that I think would be really exciting is to make it more user-friendly and have a really exciting interface that feels really awesome and positive. Indivisible National, no, you guys didn't create it. Another Indivisible group created something called Amplify. Does anybody know Amplify? We used it a little. We really didn't get a lot of buy-in, but one of the things that I liked about it was that it had a little cheer section. Then when somebody reported something, you could cheer them, kind of like a like on Facebook. So I think something that feels really positive and not really school-like or homework-like, I think would be amazing.
I was actually just going to talk about Amplify and how we use that. But the problem, I think, too, is there's this problem with too many apps or too many ways to communicate and figuring out how, because also everybody feels different about different ways. Some folks are really comfortable with Slack. Some people are just send me an email and then with the Amplify, I thought that was a really terrific way to get people mobilized, very easy. But then you're just all of a sudden overwhelmed with all the apps and the emails, and then the communication becomes overwhelming and you shut off. So that's a problem, and I don't know the answer, just it's a problem. So
I'll talk more about some of the stuff. I mean, like where we're headed to, and some of the resources that we're looking to roll out, because some of that might be relevant for the type of things that we would want to independently build, group by group. But one of the places where we want to move is providing like a set of tools that groups can take, and use and have, ideally like free access to, so, one of the things that, Indivisible National would like to do is like, here's like a great call tool that we piloted in these groups that people really like. And, any group that wants it can take it, and use. And here's like a text tool. Here's like all of the set of tools. And we're well on our way to having many of those things available too. And there's broader infrastructure things I can talk about too when we talk about tech stuff, but 100% I hear your point, and that was one of the things that we heard very loud and clear in the survey process and the listening process. And
to in Big Indivisible, National Indivisible's credit, I always call it Big Indivisible. I have no idea why. What I think is really cool about Indivisible is that it is a true grassroots group, and we met with Ezra and Leah. I mean, I guess 3 months ago. It feels like years ago. But they said we don't want to be this sort of top-down hierarchical system because that's not what we're about. And it's the reason this movement is effective is because it's real and it's actual people and it's actual people standing up. For the call relays, and just so you guys know just how important and they are, like as far as our group's goals, not even just the nuts and bolts, like I think one of the most powerful parts of Indivisible is knowing that you're doing everything en masse. There are 2 Indivisible groups in every congressional district, and the average is like 13, I want to say. And and to know that there's a national day of action and tons of other people are calling one senator, the groups themselves feel empowered because they're standing #StandingIndivisible with other groups. And then also the elected officials, because they're hit in bulk by something. They're like, oh, wow, like this is a real thing. So like the importance of these call relays can't be underestimated. And again, the accountability is so important. And I know I know there are members of my group who, if they got a little pop-up notification saying, hey, you signed up for this call time, you should do it right now. You know what I mean? They'd be like, oh, I'll do it. And then, if they could be like seen for having done it, it would mean a lot to them going forward.
So I think we're at that point wherein I would love to know how or what are the technology needs or the things that you see what technology can do to amplify and really increase the capacity of Indivisible. And maybe we could start with the national side and then we could go through the state of New York.
So I think I'll talk briefly about what the current situation is and then where we want to go. So right now, there are 6,000 groups around the country. That from the national vantage point, there is a system called ProsperWorks, which is basically a souped-up Salesforce that's a CRM that has between 1 to 5 contact per group. For each group, and there's a group segment to it. We have social media information, whatever relevant information tracked in those groups. But I would say that's incomplete as a system for membership management. We are on ActionKit and have about 200,000 emails on our national list. We have our various national social media platforms. Then there are the Mobilize, which is intended to be a social networking site, internal, that is basically a souped-up Slack, and is not, I would say, has not been adopted at the rate that I think the people that launched it intended. And then there are the 6,000 groups out in the world, who are all independently building their own things and their own solutions. And we think there are about 1.4 million people who are part of Indivisible. We know that from scraping Facebook groups and events and it was just a count. And we don't have at the national level already access to those 1.4 million people. Now, where the organization would like to go, and this is both from what we're hearing from the groups, but also from the national leadership, is we need to build out our knowledge of what's actually happening out there in the world under Indivisible. So having a better sense of who actually belongs to different groups, and having some type of this measurement of what's actually happening, so that we have some sort of metric for success, and that we can actually communicate in a broad way. I think that ideally we would want to provide a set of tools and resources to groups to use to organize themselves in all the ways that you said. That's very much the thing that National is thinking about. And ideally, as we're doing that, as we're putting out tools and platforms that people can use, we would want to have that be on the same platform so that we actually have one holistic view of what actually is happening. So our membership database, ideally as many groups are on the same membership database as possible, and that's coming back to one central repository. And we also need a better sense for governance and decision making. So if Indivisible wants to build a platform, or we're going to be going into electoral seasons and we're thinking about endorsements, so how do we actually get a real sense of what Indivisible's base actually thinks and where they stand on an issue? So we're exploring systems like Polis, which uses machine learning to sort of visualize large groups, but that's absolutely something that I would toss out to this group, that it's a very much a live question about how to actually assess what's actually happening, and how to come to group consensus with this type of scaled network. And the other thing that I would toss out is really trying to think about how we might be able to get a better sense of, at the individual level, about who belongs to which groups, and the measurement of activity that's not anonymized or aggregated, but actually allows us to pull that into a database. And that one thing that I will say that's in the works is that we are part of a broader effort called the Movement Cooperative. That is, there's 11 national groups exploring this, where we would have, as we're moving into electoral activity, we would have a core utility of a national voter file that would be platform and tool neutral. And would also provide a data infrastructure to support multiple databases. So we're moving in the direction of trying to come up with a sort of more movement-wide solution to data file usage and data storage as well. But
what I will say, the two things that I thought of beyond the call relay, because I think that's the most common thing. Something I emailed Lisa about this just a few days ago. Obviously, we're not a club, or not a democratic club or anything. We're an activist group, and there are no dues or anything. But we've recently come into issues with funding things, and I think there's an emptiness on all sides, because it's touchy. It's money just sucks, and so one of our amazing members, we're doing some leafleting coming up this month at subway stops, and she spent $460 on materials and fronted it, and then it's just hey guys, Venmo me, and then 8 people end up, you know the drill. And if I think there's a lack of that sort of something like a GoFundMe that isn't money grubby and also lives in progressive politics land. You guys would figure that out better than I could, but anyway, that's something I thought of. And I so am on board with you. I think it's time we electoralize the resistance, and so much of Indivisible has been snaps. So much of Indivisible has been around legislative stymieing of the GOP and radical Trump policies. And I'm newly I've gotten my group hip to We Volunteer, which is Mahender's brainchild, and it's sort of like a volunteer management way to get people to actually sign up to do a thing. And like today was our first primary, and none of us knew, we're a bunch of activists and whatever, but we didn't know where to go to canvass, what doors to knock. We're just all new, and we're all we're finding our sea legs. So those are the two other things beyond the call relays that I wanted to bring up.
The one thing that one of our members brought up, and it didn't occur to me even though I read this article, was this concern around cybersecurity or data security. And particularly well, I don't know if I need to get into that, but yeah, just cybersecurity. Thanks.
I think that there's a lot of smaller solutions that can kind of be plugged in. Our group has really been looking at volunteer management platform as a solution to some of these things, like figuring out who our members are. I mean, people ask us how many members do you have, and we think, well, we have a certain amount of Twitter followers. We have a lot of people who read our newsletter and show up to get letters signed. Then we have, it's kind of a take it or leave it, or take what you like, leave the rest sort of smorgasbord that we offer that people can kind of get active or not, which is fine with us, but it'd be great to kind of have a better handle on that. So something like a volunteer management platform would enable us to sort of develop this sort of volunteer thing. And then things like accountability, that kind of group, like when you've done something. That's another thing that people can, I'm sort of maybe dreaming pie in the sky here, but like maybe people can set up their own profile and track their own volunteer hours and get rewards or, big kudos when they've been doing something. Like Slack keeps track of how many people or how many messages people have been sending. And we had a volunteer who sent over almost 200 messages in a week or a month. I mean, it was something kind of ridiculous. Like, if we had a platform where that could kind of engagement could be tracked, then we'd have a better idea of where to focus our leadership and who to target. Because I think leaders are doing a lot of the work. And there's almost a leadership deficit in that kind of second tier of volunteers that are stepping up, but they're not quite ready to like really take on something and lead, And if we can start to have data to identify those people and start to get those gears going of, hey, yeah, I can lead a group of 10 people, I can do this, then we can start to really actually expand that reach. And I think technology has a big place. And there are things that almost everything that we're asking for already exists. It's just a matter of bringing it together and making it something that all of us can use. That we're not just kind of having a plethora of apps to log in, and it's too much.
One other thing that occurred to me and to our group was not only a place for fundraising, but also in-kind donations. So maybe you could like make your house available, but some sort of in this central place where we're going to have all these apps and access to all this wonderful information. A place where somebody could say, I don't have time to do this action, but you can use my living room to have a meeting. Honestly, that would make a huge difference for I think all of us. But something like that, or I don't mind buying a 6-pack because I know it's after work and you guys need to relax. But stuff like that, just in-kind donations. So if there's a way to have that kind of a fun, I don't even know what you'd call that, fundraising page.
Mm-hmm. So I think for any other questions, please feel free to engage with our amazing panel. Could you all give them a round of applause, please? That was awesome. Thank you so much. I think Josh had to go for a phone call, but again, to our panel, thank you, Josh, Ginger, Lisa, Nicole. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your stories with us.